Voy a presentar a nuestro siguiente conferencista, con quien cerramos el Congreso. Él es Ian Colburn. Él nació en Denver, Colorado, y estudió arquitectura en el Tecnológico de Virginia. Es miembro fundador de Make Design y Pudo International, una compañía enfocada al desarrollo sostenible en todo el mundo que ha desarrollado y construido estructuras en la Patagonia, en Chile. También ha trabajado como diseñador en las oficinas de Robert Gurney, un arquitecto de Washington, Five Studio en la ciudad de Nueva York y Snohetta en Oslo, Noruega. En la actualidad trabaja en las oficinas de Nueva York de Snohetta. Este despacho realiza proyectos de arquitectura, paisaje, diseño de interiores y también diseño de marca. Pues le damos la bienvenida y adelante, por favor.
Hello, I hope everyone's doing well. You've had a lot of time, I think, spent in this room in the last couple of days, and I'm happy that I get to be the last to speak here today, so thank you all for that. I'm actually coming from New York right now, and it looks like this. So it's been really nice to actually arrive here and have the wonderful weather. I hope this works. I would just like to start off by thanking UNAM for asking Snohetta and myself to be part of your Congress today. It's of course a pleasure for us to come down and speak to the students, speak to everybody that's interested in the projects that we're working on. They were also gracious enough to let me see some of the local architecture. This is, of course, a project that I've always wanted to see, and I've been to Mexico before, but never got the chance. So this morning we were able to go and walk and see this magnificent urban planning project and really feel the history. Feel the sun, of course. I got a little bit red out there today, as you might notice. But it just, at the end of walking around today, I felt somehow I was a little bit more Mexican just by going to this place. And it for you is such a huge part of your culture. So for me, that little moment was very nice that allowed me to feel a bit more Mexican. And it got me thinking, and we are often thinking at these congresses. So I'm going to show a short video here first, and then I'll explain it to kick it off. But again, thank you to UNAM, and I'm very happy to have finally seen this beautiful Tehuac. They may have to click on the screen up there to get it to play. There we go. Unfortunately, we don't have the sound here, but in general, it's just the sounds of the city. So everyone's holding their breath. That's not me, by the way. Think. So this actually was, we took a small part in this. We were the ones to design the bubble for this. It was a commercial that was done in Norway for this car company called Think. And their whole mantra for the company is that the car itself is zero emissions. And I think most of you understood that the air that the car was actually making was better than the air quality outside. And it was quite a fun thing to do. We designed the bubble, and we got to take part in that. But it's quite a nice goal that this company has put for themselves, that they actually have zero emissions. We're here to talk today about sustainability. And I think for everyone, most likely they quickly think about HVAC systems. They start to think about how we can best use our energy, our lighting, all of the mechanical and technical systems that go into making a building. How do we make them run most efficiently? For us, this is something that has always been part of our work, but we also think a little bit more broadly in terms of sustainability. There's 5 key concepts that we're very interested in in keeping as part of our projects and promoting and talking about and discussing with the greater population. So it's fun today to be able to talk to students about this and get some feedback on them, on these different ways of thinking about sustainability. So although they're different ways of thinking, I think they're just for you to engage in as we move forward in presenting our work. Ecological, social, economic, cultural, and intellectual sustainability are primarily important to actually making the projects possible. And without these, if you had a building that was just full of all of the technology, the number one technology in the world, you would just have a sustainable building. But you need the rest of these for it to be a successful project. I was thinking about this on the way here and sort of perusing the internet. You find wonderful images out there. And I ran across this one, which is actually, at first glance, sort of something we've all seen, but it's Mars. Somebody had put together an overlay of a map here of what Mars would look like prior to its demise. So that all the green is obviously the landmass and where the water is. This is actually what Mars looks like, which is sort of scary. Our Earth looks like the previous image, and Mars now looks like this. For me, that's a bit scary. I hope we don't end up like this. I'm not trying to lead by fear in any way, but I think it's something that we can learn from off of our planet, that we've got to take care of ourselves so we don't end up on Mars. Snohetta, this idea is directly related to us and what we think about in terms of architecture. We as a firm started off as a landscape firm. We won a competition in 1989 for a library in Alexandria, Egypt. At the time, we were actually a landscape architecture firm, and many of the works that we were doing were smaller scale, but we've always had this greater connection to the earth. At that time, we didn't have the name Snohetta, and we had to choose a name once we won this large international competition. We weren't pretentious enough to choose the name of the tallest mountain in Norway, so we went for the second tallest, which is also much easier to pronounce. So that's primarily where the name comes from, and it's fabled to be also where Valhalla took place, so there's this mythos that goes along with the Norwegian stories. It's every year we get together in Norway and we hike the mountain. It's sort of a treacherous place. You can actually imagine this being Valhalla. But all of us, both from the New York office and the Oslo office, get together. We go out in the middle of nowhere and hike this mountain. You're detached from all cell phones, all technology, everything, and you're there with Mother Nature and this great mountain. We represent many locations on this earth. We've got pretty much the whole globe covered within the two offices. We're just over 70 in Oslo and just over 40 architects. This doesn't include our admin here. We're both connected somewhat to a place that is a transition on the earth between water and land. Oslo a little bit closer. But we're primarily based in cities. So for us, it's really an amazing thing to step outside of our cities, go to this really treacherous mountain. And often it is quite an experience, this hike. It's not easy, and we feel our bodies being connected to the physical elements, sometimes snow and rain, and the hike itself is quite treacherous. So then we come back to our desks in our cities and we begin to think about building in those cities or building near those cities. We're not the first ones to think about cities. This is Corbusier's utopian plan. It's amazing to me that we haven't quite achieved this yet. Frank Lloyd Wright also had some other ideas that were actually the antithesis of what Corbu was after. And I think we find ourselves in the middle somewhere, which is quite interesting that neither utopian is achieved yet, and maybe we just continue to plan and design utopias. It's obvious that we need to really think about our cities. Everyone's moving to the city. From this, you can see we're right at the pinnacle crossover, where there's more people in the cities than in the rural population, and this is dramatically going to change the way that we live. If you break it down a little bit further, we start to see what's happening across the different regions of the Earth, and we're all tending in the same way. This one is sort of interesting to me. From most of you know this image. It's from space at night and all of the non-LED lights that we're using. But it's 2% of the population cover 50% of the Earth, and they use 75% of the resources and create 80% of the waste. These are staggering statistics for the amount of space that is untouched here. And if we continue to move in the way that we are, we're going to topple these statistics. So we need to do two things primarily. Most people have this word has been running around, but I found this image recently, and it really speaks to me in a way. We think globally, but we act locally. This is something in our work that we will continue to be an exploration with the underlying ideals of the different ways of thinking about sustainability. One of the first images or projects I want to talk about is actually at the city scale. We've not had the opportunity often to work at this scale, but we were invited by Saudi Arabia to work on a project called Care, which was an entire city that was supposed to be net zero, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this one is a video, so if you just click the screen, it should start. I think that's starting at the end. Did you click twice? That we just kind of blew it. That's the end image. Can you, I'll go back one. Try clicking again. Just anywhere in the black space. There we go. So we were shortlisted for this competition. We had to present to the King Abdullah, and we didn't end up winning the project, but it set in motion many of the things that I've already begun to discuss. The area is in the middle of the desert in Saudi. It's one of these grand projects that they want to deploy as soon as possible and as quickly as possible. They want to use as much solar energy, geotechnical energy, wind energy. So we had to go deep into many of the studies to understand the capabilities of the place. These images will take you through the overall project, but what's more important, which we'll get to in a bit, are all the studies behind this, the actual technological understanding of why we ended up with the shapes that we ended up with and where we ended up placing the city, at least to begin. Our strategy going in was to present them with sort of the roots, a master planning ideal that could then make itself grow over time. We didn't think that we were prepared enough or ready to say, this is what your city should be. There's too much time that's going to pass in the future for us to really figure out and predict what's going to happen 150 years from now. So these are just the roots of what we know now at the height of technology, using the best possible ways of producing, as I mentioned, technological solutions to sustainability at this time. But we also have to allow for growth. And this is where we begin to fall back on the other elements of the themes. So as we go through the programming here, you can understand that there's a social aspect to it. The density of people are close enough that they can interact daily. I'll let the technical stuff just speak for itself as we go along. There's cultural elements to the program that we added so that people actually want to be in this city, and for more reasons than that they're underneath a solar collector roof. There's an economic driver to this. There's obviously the environmental sustainability. We're doing all of the list of things that we're trying to make this as low energy as possible. The idea is to start with a vertical hub here that's kind of tucked into a place that's more amenable to people in surviving. But it also, we found that our wind studies, this is the place where we could collect the most energy. Up top is an enormous solar array. As you see, as we go forward, it begins to grow as the city grows. So it continues to support this. It's obvious in the desert, there's plenty of space for a solar array of this nature. And as the technology continues to advance and be more accepted in the greater Earth, there will be an economy behind it that will allow it to be one of the best ways of producing energy. So in the long run, over time, we just ended up with a few of these smaller nodes, and allowed the city to grow. So there's some fun ideas there. For whatever reason, they chose somebody else, but for us, it's a key project that we begin to look back at when we start to approach new cities. What sort of elements can we draw from this project and apply here? Do they exist? Do they have the same climatic capabilities? And are we able to employ some of these maybe at a smaller scale? So now we have this huge bank of data just from this single project that we can rely on, which is really, really quite fun. I'll just go quickly through some of these. One of the biggest challenges here is the watershed. We actually found that there was quite a lot of watershed to this ravine location where we began to design the first phase of the project. The collection for that is obviously key, and then the production of energy. The shading studies were also key to the first reverse zoning, as well as the wind, as I discussed before. So the wind collection became actually more of an energy driver than the solar, at least in the first phase. And then as things grew, the solar would help balance that. And we're using all the CFD programs that most of you are using and walking through step by step to allow us to understand where the design should go. We're not coming at this and saying, oh, we want to put a huge solar kind of roof over this whole thing and then let the engineers figure it out. It's actually sort of the reverse and working in tandem. We're working at that large scale, and then we're also working at a very small scale. We have a bench in Guatemala City that we did. It was a city commission, but it has many of the elements that I've talked about before. Social is primarily the one that we see here. The way the benches are shaped, people can sit around them, and these mosaics that you see were actually part of a cultural initiative. We left those areas blank. We didn't design those, and the city made it their initiative to collect particular artists that would infill with those mosaics. So each one has its own identity that we were not a part of. But all of the things within the sustainable architecture are beginning to happen here. You have social, you have cultural, you have an economic driver. There's a bit of pride that happens when something of design quality is put in the city and people begin to take care of it in a really beautiful way. So these are deployed throughout the city, and they have the design, and as they need, they create and make more. Everybody always wants to talk about energy and sustainable energy. We're working on this very closely. Again, refer back to the 5 thoughts when we're going through these. I'm not hitting them one by one, but you can begin to piece them together. We're working on a project in Norway right now. It's called Powerhouse, and it's all about energy. It's all about the collection of energy into these buildings, using the same sort of design methods, working closely with our engineers. And in this case, we actually have a contractor on board, because these are intended to be the first net zero buildings in Norway. The one on the left is a building that it already exists. It's an office structure, and we've already put it into play. And then the one on the right will be a new construction building. The definition of powerhouse is a building, well, I'll just let you read here, a building that during its life cycle actually produces more energy than what went into it. But what's important about to remember here is that includes all the energy that went into collecting the materials, bringing the materials to the site, building the actual site, and then the demolition of the building. So there's a very high standard here we're setting. We're actually asking the government to start to look at this project and make it part of an initiative for every building that goes in. The primary things that we need to understand are the operational energy, the embodied energy, and the materials, and the production of renewable energy on site. So Powerhouse is the name, and it is going to make power. And the only way that we can really achieve net zero or net plus is to make it a battery for the city, a place that actually makes more energy. We want to be the first to do this, which is always a challenge. And we also want to do it very simply. This is actually a Norwegian invention, if you didn't know that. Every day you're handling a little bit of Norway. But it's also very much a representation of some Norwegian design. It's one material used very simply to do many, many different things. As I mentioned, our contractor and builder we're working with is Nordic Built. We've put together a few ideals for them. One that I spoke about before is it's made for the people, that it merges with the qualities of living, and that it utilizes the resources, local resources, and are adapted to local conditions. This is being done in Norway, but you could put this anywhere else in the world, and these things still apply. So we actually did achieve on this project the BREEAM Outstanding Award, which is equivalent to LEED in Britain, and it's operating right now at a net zero. So as we watch this little bit of a movie here, these are all the areas that we were able to implement some of the design considerations for recovering energy, heat recovery, comfort criteria, energy wells. So we have actually geothermal happening here, taking into account our water collection, consumption, and recirculation. Understanding how much heat we can actually create and how much that we'll have to rely on the district, which is minimal, and at certain points we actually sell heat back because we're collecting more energy during the solar periods. And then some of the environmental stresses, which are quite extreme in Norway. So it's a right project to try to achieve this very high standard of energy efficiency. And then obviously it's cold there, so insulation. Again, it was existing buildings. Some of the tactics that we've been working on, 40% windows, 60% opaque wall, solar array on the roof. You can just look here. And it's now built and up in operation. We have to carry these ideals not only from the facade, but into the interiors. And it's key for us that it's not, in terms of design, it's not just a technological piece of architecture sitting there in front of you that looks terrible. So all those systems that we would normally see as technologically advanced are hidden in the interior architecture. And as I mentioned before, we have a BREEAM Outstanding Award, and it's under operation. What's nice here too is that the commissioning, I think, is up to 30 years. So they're going to watch this building and see how it actually performs for the next 30 years. That's something that we are interested in seeing. The contractor agreed to, and the owner is definitely interested in putting forth, because the economic sustainability for the investment that they got originally is going to show itself, and we're going to track that over time. And we'll make adjustments along the way if there's things that we see coming back that need adjusting. The next project or the next challenge for this is to actually do it with a ground-up building. So this form, as I mentioned before, is going to follow the environment. I'll go through this fairly quickly. We need an energy-efficient volume. A sphere is always the most efficient. If you've ever slept in a teepee versus a tent, you might know that. Utilizing solar power, obviously the sun is going to come up every day. Wind power, which we've seen in other projects. And then creating some surfaces that allow us to both move the program around inside, but also maintain a connection to our power intake. You always have to use the footprint for the developer, so that you're using every square inch and they get every square peso. And then we optimize the roof angle, slice it, and then the facade and the design for it is actually shifting so that we really maximize all of the intake for solar power and solar harvesting. So it's recently finally been approved. One of the challenges we had was we needed to reach a little bit taller to collect all of that solar. So our adjacent buildings, for a long time, for about a year, we were up around here to collect more solar. And the municipality just said, you have to make it lower. It's not in context as with these adjacent buildings. And we would go back and say, yes, but the volume of the building is less than these adjacent buildings. And it was sort of a fight. And they understood in the end that that was one of the key elements, was allowing our neighbors to help us help them. We're now going to be able, once it gets built, to produce energy for them. We'll just look at a few images here. There's something that actually comes from many of the ideal structures here in the south, a courtyard that allows airflow and people to have access to light and air. The strict requirements in Norway are very difficult to come by at some points, but light and air has to enter every single space, and there's a certain amount of changeover that has to happen daily. So we hope that this is going to go forward, and we'll get it built fairly soon, but it's been a wonderful partnership with the city. We're going to move back to the desert. I think everyone was getting a bit chilly in Norway, and we're here in Mexico, so it's nice to stay warm. Another project in Saudi. This was a commission, and this commission came about in a way that's actually opposite to much of what I've been talking about. The form was designed first, and then we've spent a lot of time working with the engineers to get it up to the standards that we're looking for. One of each of those shapes that you saw are proposed to be wrapped in a stainless steel tubing. The stainless steel tubing, to allow for natural light, begins to squish itself down at certain points and open itself up, so you have views in, but also provide shading. This tubing itself is actually filled with a fluid that's slowly moving around the building, which cools the building. The fluid itself is not cooled, it's just a fluid, and because of the motion of it decreases the temperature. So we've had general mock-ups made. It's another staggering statistic that we look at here in the building industry. And we need to make sure that, especially in these harsh environments where we're being asked to build, that we respond to all of these things, that we don't just create more waste, more of the world's resources used in a way that may not prolong the life of the building, and then of course water use. Despite what everybody might realize, transportation is not the biggest user of energy. It's actually the building industry, and CO2 emissions by buildings are number one. So our buildings, they fart a lot, and we have to get control of that and reuse that energy, because just like a car, it's heat and energy going out the door. Some of the other industry is already moving towards rectifying a lot of this, and if we take some of the scenarios that we've been looking at, we should be able to achieve a drop-off and start to get our CO2 emissions in order by 2030. Whoops. The Aramco project here in Saudi, it's going to be not a net zero project, but it will embody a lot of these principles in an area that, again, will be tracked. And it's, for us, sort of a research in the same way that the ones in Norway are a climatic research experiment. This one is the opposite. So we're going to be able to gain data from the building as it continues to survive out in the desert. And we'll have a balance of understanding from that data. And this is the client, and he's pretty happy. The complex form was a challenge for us and for him, and we've finally overcome some of that. So now we get to see some of the sexiness of this stainless steel tubing and the energy enabling methods to go into play. I'm going to go through this quickly because we have to remind ourselves of history, that these aren't new ideas for us, that we were actually working with these from the beginning. The library in Alexandria, Egypt is a massive building. The stone is actually 20 centimeters thick, and that's important in this environment because it's hot. Every day in Mexico, in Mexico City, you're building this way. You're using concrete primarily, but that thermal mass is something that's impeccable in environments, harsh environments like this. The economic sustainability of this building was something that came about because of a necessity. We found the stone that we wanted for all of the characteristics that you see in the building. But the quarry had closed years ago because no one was building with it. So we went to the quarry and said, do you want to start open and start building again? And they said, well, yeah, of course, it's the National Library. We're definitely interested. So we worked actually in the field with many of the people, and this building in itself has started an economy that was non-existent at the time. There's also some bronze panels on the interior that sparked a new economy there that is still running, and really beautiful. Another one that we did a while back that held on to some of the same principles was the Norwegian Embassy in Berlin. You wouldn't think it, but the facade on the right performs, although it looks technologically advanced and has all these louvers and ways of mitigating sun and heat. The facade on the right, which is part of the same building, performs way worse than the one in the center. So this stone is actually a stone that we cut in Norway. We cut it out of the quarry as a symbol of our country. We put it on a boat and we took it to Germany. Everybody thought we were crazy. All the engineers told us, what are you doing this for? It's just something that you want. And we said, okay, let's do your job. Run the numbers, run the cost, and you tell me that it's less expensive to get the stone in Germany, move it to the site, have people put it in place, rather than ship it. So they did the energy analysis on what it would take to do that, the time it would take to actually build the wall, and the costs that it would take. And this method blew them out of the water. It was less time, less energy, and less cost to put this in. And overall, it performs better than a built wall. Obviously, we can't do this all the time, and you have to have a particular stone. But it was an area where we challenged the industry to come back to us and say, let's try and make this thing happen for all the right reasons. Not because we're crazy architects and we just want to have a fun stone in Germany. But they responded in a great way, and now it's been here since the early 90s. Recently, in 2008, we opened the Opera House in Oslo. Again, our 5 ideals of sustainability are put into play here. This wasn't the site that we were given in the competition. We found that we thought we could engage the population by putting the building in the water. And in doing so, we engaged many more difficulties, be it political, social, economic, ecological. This particular bay, it was the shipping bay, so there wasn't really a cultural center to Oslo at the time. It was part and partial to the municipality, and there was an opera, but it was close by government buildings. So by putting the building in the water, we forced the entire bay, which had historically been a shipping bay, to be cleaned up. Again, it wasn't a want or a need, it felt like something that we had to do, and turned out to be something that was beneficial. Bringing people to the water. It's natural. Everybody wants to swim. I mean, you see a little pond, you go and you jump in it. You see a puddle when you're 3 years old and you stamp in it. It's natural. And all of our cities across the world right now don't have access to the water. We've industrialized and we've built these huge walls coming straight out of the water, and nobody can go touch it. It's really sad. It's our life. It's our lifeblood water. So there was more behind it than just pushing the building into the water because we think it would be fun. I think I have a few here. The social aspect to this is that I think there was a formal challenge with the building that we were interested in pushing, and the connection to the water and this bridge between landscape and building. But we met with so many politics regarding this. We presented the project and everyone said, no, you can't do that. You're going to have handrails all over that. You're going to have to make sure that everybody's safe and wheelchairs can go everywhere. And we said, well, hold on a second. Can we do one of two things? Can we either make it art so that you take the risk when you actually engage in it, or can we make it part of the national parks? And the politicians started thinking, rather than just going to the books and the laws and saying, oh yes, that you can't do it. Our proposals were actually were taken seriously. So they pondered the idea, and it is part of a national park. We were able to use the standards of landscape rather than the building codes for people to inhabit that, the roof surface. Of course, many lawyers come into the room and they say, yes, that's fine, but it is a building. So what are we going to do here? You have to put handrails on it. You can build it. It can be a national park, but you have to put handrails. And of course, we can't put handrails on this. I mean, it would just kill it. So we said, well, let's ask the people that are actually going to walk around on this thing. Let's see what they feel. Do they want to take the personal responsibility for themselves to be around this place? So there was a national vote, and of course everyone voted, yes, we don't want any handrails, we want this icon to be here, we want to be able to climb on it, and they really took ownership of this building. So it was really, really a wonderful turn of events for us. I think we would have walked away if we had to put handrails on it. Getting back a little bit to the global idea and our cows, we have done a few projects with the cows, or in this case, we actually have sheep. They were our client, but also the sheep that are traveling are our clients. So this is a tourist destination in the middle of Norway. All of the materials that you see here are pulled within almost 20 kilometers of the site. So all the stone was collected on the site. The wood was brought from very, very close by. And it was a project that challenged us to work very quickly in a small amount of time to produce something fairly substantial. And our material palette was very small. So although sometimes we're working with quite huge budgets in Oslo, we're also working with very small, interesting projects that allow us to engage, again, dig our hands in the dirt and pick up some stones, put them into some caissons, and eventually you develop a project out of it. A new one that is also at this scale that we're interested in pushing is sort of bounding from Kakher, the big one in Saudi, the big city. We're looking at having 10 to 20 people inhabit this house. The house is, again, going to be part of the powerhouse projects and run itself. So we're looking at all different scales and seeing the best performance that we get from this. This is currently under construction. Wood in Norway is traditionally quite plentiful and renewable, so that's the major part of our structure here. And then there's solar arrays and recirculating water and collection and all of those. But it's just getting into fruition, and we'll continue to look at it. Cities, getting back to cities a little bit, we're working on a little project in San Francisco. It's the expansion to the Modern Art Museum there. The area has a need for cultural sustainability. Mario Bota built on the other side of our proposal here in the 90s, and he actually invented this neighborhood by doing so. It was a desolate area before, and now many people have moved into the area, and it's got quite a large residential population, but offices are starting to move in here, and it's becoming less of a cultural place and more of a place of commerce. So the SF MoMA, to really hold on to their neighborhood, interviewed a few architects around the world and settled in on us, and we've been working with them very closely on creating this. If we want to talk a little bit about technology here, this actually is, it looks like concrete, but it's a very thin concrete, GFRG, and it's a fiberglass reinforced concrete. What's interesting about this is we're in a seismic zone. The concrete is going to last a long time, which will help the operations of the building over time. It's minimal, the cleaning that it needs, and it's very lightweight. So it's less material, but we're getting the really the feeling of something pretty substantial. And it's really the seismic reasons that are driving a lot of this. But it brings a body to the building. Culturally and socially, we have this open space, which is open to the street on the Howard Street side. This is actually a public gallery that anybody can come in anytime without buying a ticket. And it was sort of a revolutionary thing to the art world, because they covet their art. I mean, that's the thing, you pay the ticket and you go stand and you see the art. And we told them, well, that's fine, but some people don't realize that they need to pay the ticket to get through the door, and they're probably not interested in what's inside anyway. So let's make them interested, get them through the door, and then ask them to pay for the ticket. And they thought that was a great idea. So fortunately, we're able to have Richard Serra and his torqued ellipses for the next 5 years in here. He came to us, and we were working in the office and had an interview with him, and we showed him all our renderings and asked him what he thought of the space and how the sculpture fit in the space. And he said, well, I like the sculpture, of course, but can we get rid of these columns? which was just a wonderful thing for an artist to say. and very nice. We unfortunately couldn't get rid of the columns. As most of you might know, we need those, and want people to review back to that. So we have several terraces that you can step away from the art, re-engage the city at a different platform. So you, in response to the horizontal plane, is something that we're always reintroducing to the population, reminding them that they need to get outside, have a breath of air, and talk to some birds. The interior spaces are lit electronically, but always thinking about indirect light. I think next time we do this, we just tilt this up a little bit so they don't have direct light in my eyes. But it's something that a lot of people don't think about. Indirect lighting is something that actually makes you feel much better. It makes you enjoy the space better. So it's a series of, oops. It's a series of coffers up above that allow the space to be lit, and then the only downlights that you see are lighting the art. And if the curators are good, they're going to light them in a way that you don't see them. Another little project we're working on has a lot to do with social sustainability. I've been in New York 10 years now, and I never go to Times Square. Nobody ever goes to Times Square unless you're a tourist and you want to, look at tall buildings or see the urban cowboy play out there in his underwear at 2 Below. It's a tourist destination. It's one of the top 10 tourist destinations in the world. So one of our first challenges with this project was, how do you bring New Yorkers actually back to one of the centers of their city? It's been a long-going project. The mayor has been behind it for quite a while. It's in the end probably going to be 10 or 12 years that the project has been underway. One of the first things the mayor did was, he said, let's not just go forward and do this and spend all this money. Let's have a little experiment. So he said, let's close Broadway. That pissed all the taxi drivers off because they know their city and they want their roads. And then we'll have some artists design the paint that we're going to put down to signify that it's a pedestrian space. That lasted for 3 years, that experiment. The taxi drivers loved it in the end. They were no longer engaging all of those tourists or the naked cowboy in the middle of the street where everybody wants to look up anyway because there's so much going on above them. The pedestrians loved it. They no longer had to interact with the taxis and make sure they didn't get run over. So it was a great experiment, and then they eventually came to us and asked us to make it a more permanent proposal. Understanding that there's so much chaos going on up above with the lights, and I think eventually they're going to put a roof over this thing with more billboards looking down at you, and it's like an advertising haven, which is completely unbelievable. We wanted to just level the playing field. So on the lowest level, we have just a simplified cast concrete paver system, and then these tremendous benches. They're 60 feet in length, and there's a lot of infrastructure going into this project. It's the first time in New York's history that they've gone to this extent to to renovate such a huge public space. So they're redoing all of the lines underneath, they're doing the water lines, the electrical lines, and I think it's right here. MTV has their studios, and they're forever coming out here, dragging their generators out, all of their camera equipment. So in the future, they're going to be able to plug into this bench. There's a little panel on the backside that anybody can plug into. Even you with your laptop or iPhone can go there and charge. So all that infrastructure is removed and cleaned up. And just a really clean ground plane for people to move about on and allow the advertisement to continue to get as crazy and wild as it wants to be. We do bring a little bit of the light down, especially during the night. This is a little bit of a wayfinding and movement system. It's just a small stainless steel reflector so that it's not completely just perceived to be a concrete space. It has a little bit of reflectivity, which is quite nice. So for New Year's this year, we had 2 of the plazas completed, which was key because the mayor that put this into action, Bloomberg, completed his mayorship on the 1st of January too. So we've got a total of 5 different plazas that will be built, and 2 of them are complete. In doing this, we were able to actually build mock-ups. When you design something in the computer or in your shop, you work with it at a small scale. You understand it as this object that you can actually pick up or move around with your mouse. But it's important to get outside of that. And a lot of times you have to convince the contractors they should do this and convince the owner they should do this. But in building this mock-up, which is actually the full length, the full size, the client made some slight changes that allowed it to be that much more comfortable, and they were so happy that they were able to do this. And I think eventually somebody took this and put it on their front lawn or something, because it's not actually the granite that's being built, but that's a few of us from the office there. That's me. So it's under construction. It's a pretty watched space, so we've hired some photographers to get in there and track the construction process. I think a lot of people forget all of the work that goes into it when you get to a place and it's just there. You begin to critique it immediately without knowing all of the work that went behind it to actually bring it into fruition. And then, as I mentioned, we had the opening for the 2 plazas. This is our political players here, Mayor Bloomberg and then Amanda Burden, who is the head of the building in New York City. So we've become quite good friends with them. The last project that I want to talk about, I don't know where we're at on time. I hope I'm not putting anyone to sleep. I can talk about this stuff forever. So the last one I want to talk about is hopefully bringing us somewhat full circle. It's the Museo de Ciencias Ambientales in Guadalajara. We're working for the University of Guadalajara, and we won a competition. It was an invited, shortlisted competition. And after we won the competition, they were gracious enough to allow us to design in the way that I've been explaining, to really understand the local climate, the local culture, and the local conditions, both building conditions and general social understanding. We went on a wonderful trip around the state of Jalisco, to Tequila and to Mascota. We spent some time in Puerto Vallarta. We swam at the beach in Manzanillo, and I forget the name of this small beach here. But we stopped and they made us eat tongue, brain, and face tacos. It's quite an experience. Since then, I'm actually tracking this project, so I'm down here quite often. And since then, I've challenged myself to engage in the local culture and eat something interesting every time. Last time I had grasshoppers. So it's quite fun to understand that stuff. And the food in Mexico is some of the best that I found in the world. It's really fresh. It's really, the salsas are just unbelievable. So it's quite a treat for me. We even hiked a 4,000 meter volcano, Volcán Colima, stopped off at Lake Chapala, and then back to Guadalajara. A lot of this was really just looking at the people, looking at the diversity of the people, what do they do in their everyday lives, how do they interact, understanding some of the local cultural buildings. We're doing a museum here, so it has to fit within a genre of buildings, a quality that there is an expectation for, because the population has invested in buildings of this type, and they want them to last more than just a year or two. This building has been around since the early 1800s. As I mentioned before, we stopped in Tequila, which everybody laughs, but it was one of the best places to go because it's such an important part of Western Mexico and their history, from the cultivation to the land and the land use and the economic increase that it brings and change of the space. Oops. We stopped off on the beach. These are a couple of my colleagues. Craig was one of the founders that was involved in the competition in Alexandria in 1989, and Vanessa has helped build the New York office, and yeah, that's me. But it's such a diverse land, Mexico, and it has so much to offer in terms of its climatic qualities, its resources for building materials, for social interaction. We were always amazed at how many people actually are outside. We live in the U.S. Vanessa's actually from Texas, where you never go outside because it's too hot. You go from your air-conditioned car into your air-conditioned parking into your air-conditioned house. It's ridiculous. So here, it's just cultural to be outside, to interact with the plazas that are beautiful in the city, or it's very much a social scene. I mentioned we hiked the volcano. And we came back with a collection of really rich materials from across the entire breadth of Western Mexico. And it was nice for us because this was something that was set up by the client, the owner. They felt that it was a very important thing for us to actually engage in the culture. This was after we won the competition, after we put in front of them some of the design. I'll go back to the last one. We broke the rules here again. It seems like when we break the rules, we often do pretty well. But we were given this site as the competition site, which was this location. To explain a bit about what this place is, in 1992, one of the students was working on this area as their urban design thesis. He stayed in touch with the faculty, he pursued this project, and has now brought it into fruition. He worked with Cesar Pelli on the master planning at one point, and the University of Guadalajara ended up proceeding with the project. So it's their cultural campus. They first built the Telmex Auditorium, which is a 11,000-seat theater. Sting and Madonna and Alejandro Sanz and all these people come every year. I actually went to that concert. Not by choice. I was in town, and one of the people we're working with, she's like, "You've never seen a performance at the Telmex. Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's go. Let's see what it's actually like." Well, who's playing? And she says, "Oh, it's this great guy, Alejandro Sanz." She's my age, so she kind of grew up with him. Anyway, that was a cultural experience, but very fun. To the north, actually up here in the ceiling, they have a library that's built with a plaza, and then 2 theaters that are more like Broadway theaters. Again, we were given this site, but all they talked about was connecting the Telmex on the south and the library on the north. And we just kept hearing that over and over and over again. So we said, well, let's just put the building on the line and make that path apparent. Because when it was set to this side, although the path was there, it didn't have any prominence. It was just another street that looked kind of like the one over here or the one over here. But once we placed our building in the center, they reacted to it in such a positive way. We didn't know it at the time because we hadn't researched the master plan studies or had been given them to us. but it was actually the original master plan proposal. And it had changed over time, so they were quite happy because it returned to something they were trying to figure out how they could get back to and still maintain a lot of the qualities of the campus, the cultural campus. So this is the view from the south. We're using a stone that's within our, quote, LEED parameters. It's important for us that we come to the area with a form that's somewhat recognizable, approachable, but a little bit questionable. So the idea for the building is that we have a shape that's understandable, a rectangle, and then we crack it open so that there's this pathway going through. That pathway connects to the Telmex and then the library behind us. So you're already on this path, but you have to engage with our building. You don't have to get off the path. You don't even have to go in the building, but you're going to engage with it. One of the things that allowed us to do this was understanding the local climate here and how can you get people inside the building or around the building and still keep them comfortable without bringing them through the door and have them inside the air conditioning. So we took the typical colonial courtyard understanding. The building's a little bit bigger, so we put a few courtyards in it. We allowed our access line to be a driver for making that canyon. And then we knew that the shaping of this would change over time, but these forms would allow us to best react to the sustainable systems. We have some shaping that is good for passive air flow, allowing the light to be shaded in many of the areas, but it was really a climactic driver, that form. So from the courtyard, we start to connect it, eventually through the building, and then the spaces begin to manifest themselves. All drivers that are sort of not in your imagination when you begin. You just work through the methods and understandings that I've been speaking of. So this is one of the major spaces. We have open water here that you can actually play in and engage in if you choose to. But it's there mostly for climactic reasons. The evapotranspiration will help cool the space. Much of the space is shaded, so you can hang out in there. At least if you get people close to the building, they'll probably go inside. So that's part of the idea too. We are working with all the sustainable players that are possible right now with the technology that we have. We have a cistern for water collection that's happening. Rain, we do have some solar PVs. To what extent, we're not sure yet. We had an idea about the water-cooled walls, which we were using in Saudi. It doesn't seem like that one is necessary because the Guadalajara plateau is a bit higher and it is outside of what's necessary for the comfort zone. We have the passive air coming through because of the shaping of these strange canyons. And then we're working from the technology end to make sure that these ideals are actually possible and put into play. So our CFD modeling is showing us that the particles do in fact come from the west. They make their way in. Because we have a large opening here, the stack effect is happening, and we're getting a lot of draw through the canyon area, which is going to effectively cool it more than if it was just in a shaded space. One of the fun ones that we didn't think was actually going to work, but is going to happen. We have an auditorium in this building, and what we're doing is we're collecting wind or air at the surface level. We take it underground, and the ground itself cools the air. The air comes in, and it is just basically a passive system. There's a small fan on there, but because the earth is at a constant temperature, it's dropping the temperature range inside the auditorium to what we need it. We do still have corn. Geothermal didn't end up being something that we could pursue here. I think the heat sink was too deep and the cost ended up being too much. One of the early economic systems that we were employing was to take this really sort of strange form that's shaped by the climactic region and just lay a grid on it. And it really kind of shocked everyone. They thought that we would come with some crazy structural understanding of the building to make it actually happen, but in reality, we're still working with the same principles that exist with gravity. They're a little bit different shape. So this became a very efficient way of holding the building up that also allowed us to form the building. And maintaining the idea that people can inhabit a different plane and interact with their city in a different way. The roof is habitable. Rather than just making a stair to the roof or an elevator, we have the restaurant up there, which activates it. It's also a place for weddings. If you're interested, I can work that out for you. Give me a couple of years to get it built, but the weddings, somebody asked me about surprises in Mexico, and I didn't realize that weddings of 500 people are still happening here. It's like, okay, yeah, we'll just use the whole roof. And I think that's where we end. So this is us from Snohetta, and don't forget about the mountain in your backyard. I think we have a questions and answers period out there, if anybody has anything.
Así es, we have some questions there. Okay. Sí, mejor para tenerlo aquí en español para la audiencia y que él tenga el traductor.
We can do them in Spanish if they're about politics or soccer, because that's the extent of my Spanish.
Algunas de política. Aquí hay una pregunta interesante que dice, ¿qué propondrías para ciudades como la de México, teniendo en cuenta nuestra situación económica en relación al uso de la energía sustentable?
Well, this is a big question. You're doing a pretty good job already. One of the key things I talked about was actually getting outside. And as a population, that doesn't cost you anything at all. You just move a little bit. And it's really healthy. So continue with your public spaces. We're working on some landscape projects, and we've found that these public spaces, when they're interesting and they're attractive for people, they really get used. And it's something to invest in that has an economic understanding in the population that is really, really worth it. Directly in terms of the climate, in terms of what you can do overall as a city, I think every city has the same problems. We're using too much energy, and by being outside, you change your comfort zone, which will allow your buildings to operate at a higher temperature and use less energy in the long term. There's the basic changeovers to more efficient systems, more efficient lighting. But primarily, I would just look at the roots of who you are as people on Earth and accept that you live in a place, you've chosen to live in a place that's hot. So go outside if you want to cool off, or it's really back to the basics.
Bueno, aquí hay otra pregunta relacionada también un poco con el tema anterior. Dice, cuando hacen trabajos en el extranjero, ¿contratan mano de obra en el país o se asocian con despachos locales?
Yeah, this is a key element to us being able to do work on a global scale. We wouldn't be able to achieve any of the projects that I've shown you without having a local architect. Those are our early conversations that we have, especially in competition phase, so that we can quickly get as close to an understanding of what's happening in the region. We always have a local architect. They continue from the beginning of the project all the way through. I think it's important to maintain that and not presume that we understand what's actually happening here. Somebody that's lived here for 40 years is going to know a lot more than when I can figure out in 2 weeks. So we always have a local architect.
Un par de preguntas relacionadas con uso de materiales. En una preguntan que qué tan caro es el concreto que se utilizó en el Museo de San Francisco.
Yes, it's expensive. It's it could be more expensive. Some of the stuff we designed early on was really expensive. But I think we're using the best parts of all of the technology that goes into it. The fiberglass is actually a fairly inexpensive material. Concrete is fairly inexpensive. What is expensive is the process to put this together. The shaping of the panels has to be made out of a form that takes technology to make it, a CNC and a relationship to a computer. So there are elements behind it that are more expensive than the actual material. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, how they compare with typical concrete, but it's something that we're investing in as part of pushing the industry to do something in a new way. And as it begins to catch on, the price automatically decreases. So challenging that stuff is part of the understanding of how we move forward as architects. Fortunately, we have a client that can also pay.
Y bueno, aquí hacen otra pregunta, no sé si porque el despacho es noruego, pero preguntan que por qué la madera noruega es sustentable.
It's a sustainable wood for a couple of reasons. The population is quite small for the land that they have. It's a dense population in an urban environment where people are using less space than they are, say, in the suburbs of the US. So the amount of wood that they're using to build and be around doesn't exceed the growth that is happening naturally in the forest. So they're not using more than their earth can supply. It's just basic numbers at that point. It's also a really inexpensive material that they can get quite quickly without using a lot of energy because it's plentiful close by. It's close by because they love it. They love running into the forest and playing. When I lived there on weekends, the thing that you would do is go walk in Nordmarka, which is the northern forest. You'd first take the subway up into the forest and then get off and walk around. And whole families were out there, just out walking around in the forest. So it's something that they hold dear culturally and keep close. They haven't fallen into to letting that leave their culture. And they maintain it in such a beautiful way that it's actually sustainable for, again, all those 5 reasons. Okay, 6.
Bueno, aquí hay una pregunta que la voy a cambiar un poco. Dice, ¿ustedes han realizado proyectos que produzcan mayor energía de la que consumen?
Yeah, we've just opened Powerhouse, the first one, which was a reappropriation of an existing office building. It's not producing power yet because it's just opened. But the idea is that over the life of the building, it will produce more energy than it consumes. And if it produces more, then it will share that production with its neighbors. Only time can pass for us to understand how much energy. And from day one, it's not going to produce because it's all of the energy that just went into it to build the building. The key part, as I mentioned before, is tracking that energy as the life of the building carries forward. And we have a commitment to do that from the client, from the contractor, and from ourselves, that in the end, we'll have a precise number of years that it will take for this to become a net positive building. First net zero and then net positive, but everything's in place for it to actually produce.
Esta pregunta debe ser de algún constructor, porque preguntan que qué programa de túnel de viento utilizan en sus proyectos.
I think there's several. Again, we're working with consultants on this, so they have a varied array of programs that they're using. What we use in Norway is different than what we use in New York, and the ones that we're using here in Guadalajara are completely different too. So I can't say for sure exactly what the technology or the software is. What I would say is that you need to find one that is able to make assumptions that take into account the entire year very easily, and that you can quickly make changes and make it a design tool. Don't make it a tool that just gives you data, but actually can give you the feedback on how to make your building better. We came across one recently, and I forget the name, but it would actually, in the printout of the data at the end, it would say, if you do this, you will get these results. Change the facade from glass to stone, change the facade from, and then you can start to actually work with the tool, which was sort of interesting to us, because before it would just give you the data. The air blows this way, and then you would decide based on your reading of it. So there's some intelligent programs out there to start to look for that give you a little bit more feedback. Sorry, I don't know the names.
Bueno, tú has comentado que prácticamente en todos los proyectos ustedes dialogan con políticos, con los habitantes de la ciudad, etcétera. Pero internamente, ¿cómo es su manera de trabajar? ¿Cómo están organizados? ¿Qué especialistas trabajan adentro de la oficina?
Our roots are in Norway. The office was started there again in 1989. It's a social structure in terms of its country, and we have what used to be very flat structure. So everybody just comes in and everyone works on everything. To get into particulars of how we work within the office, the hierarchy sort of sets itself up based on experience. So if you have a particular experience with something, you might be the person that someone asks questions to about that. That doesn't mean that you're drawing the same thing over and over again because you're the curtain wall guy. It just means you know something about that, and you should probably step away from it so that others can engage you and they can experiment and they can understand it, but you disseminate that expertise based on the years of experience that you've been there. What we do with a lot of the projects when they come into the office is we hold an all-office charrette, or anybody that's available, get them involved in understanding the site, throwing tons and tons of ideas at it, and just really playing building models, sketching, drawing, talking, discussing. We have a huge table in our office where we hold these things. Sometimes we're lucky enough to actually have the client there when they get engaged in that, and we're talking about many of these issues that we've already explained. What it does is it allows the design of the buildings to well, first everybody gets their yayas out and they get their authorship out there. And then you start to look at each of those projects, how they overlap, how they pertain to the site, and you start to draw from each one the best qualities that make sense for the project, that make sense for the site. And through those discussions and doing so, you start to lose the authorship of like who actually drew the thing. And it goes on for a couple of days, and by the end you totally forget who actually did it, and everyone's just focused on making the best project. That's the same sort of thing we do prior to engaging in those workshops. We go out into the public and engage people and ask them about the project and get their opinion. And we're making projects for public. They're all public projects, so getting more opinions is better. They're for you guys in the end. So we should understand what you're interested in rather than just taking out of our pocket our ego and placing it on the table. So we try and foster that within the office too with these charrettes. And they're really fun too. It's like being back in studio and creating these things.
Bueno, esta es la última pregunta y creo que con esta última frase que Ian acaba de decir nos queda claro que esta profesión es una profesión de servicio. Creo que en estos días han escuchado muchísimas visiones y pues yo los conmino a que sigan adelante, chicos. Y sobre todo que vean estas experiencias y que entendamos eso, ¿no? La arquitectura sirve a la sociedad. Y un aplauso, por favor. Vamos a entregarle a Ian Colburn su diploma. La Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México otorga el presente reconocimiento a Ian Colburn por su participación como conferencista magistral en el 9º Congreso Internacional de Arquitectura con Alta Tecnología, Bioclimática y Diseño Sustentable, Forma Sigue la Energía, por mirarse a hablar el espíritu, y lo firman el arquitecto Marcos Massari, el maestro en arquitectura Raúl Buitrón y el arquitecto Héctor Ferreiro. Sí. Y ahora voy a invitar a nuestros directivos, ya está por aquí el arquitecto Marcos Massari, el arquitecto Héctor Ferreiro, el arquitecto Armando Carranco, Raúl Buitrón también. Caray, se me olvida el más importante, el organizador del Congreso. Por favor, los invitamos a clausurar este importante evento.
Quiero comentarles que, desde luego, estamos ya en el 9º Congreso, como todos ustedes saben. Cada Congreso ha tenido una temática específica, concreta, y nos toca el año que entra celebrar el 10º Congreso. Estamos haciendo planes para hacer una relatoría de lo que ha pasado en los 10 congresos con el que vamos a tener el año que entra. 10 años, pues desde luego no es fácil en la organización de un evento como este, y yo creo que va a merecer la pena celebrarlo. Y quiero, desde este foro del 9º Congreso, invitarlos a todos ustedes al del año siguiente. Yo me quiero referir muy brevemente, nada más a algunos de los conceptos que tuvimos oportunidad de escuchar a lo largo de este magnífico evento. A mí me parece que Luis Noel, cuando tuvimos la primera plática, le dio al clavo. Ella dijo que era muy importante en la arquitectura el sitio y la propia arquitectura, porque en palabras de ella dijo que la arquitectura le da valor al sitio y el sitio le da valor a la arquitectura. Sin esta unión, sin esta relación de unos con otros, yo creo que un sitio sería cualquier sitio, y la arquitectura, sin estar relacionada con el sitio, podría ser cualquier arquitectura. Hemos visto a lo largo de este 9º Congreso arquitectura magnífica, pero recuerden ustedes que también desafortunadamente se puede hacer mala arquitectura. Déjenme pensar en esas casas repetidas interminablemente, todas igualitas, sin ninguna consideración hacia ese entorno, hacia ese medio ambiente. Yo creo que debemos cada vez alejarnos más de estos ejemplos, porque no hay una relación de amistad, de interdependencia, de armonía, de cuidado con el entorno. Y yo creo que esto, que ya lo comento, lo mencionó primero Luis Noel en la primera sesión, ha sido muy importante. A lo largo de todas las sesiones, yo quisiera mencionar que hemos visto una arquitectura de extraordinaria calidad en todos los ponentes. Díganme si no. Es un ejercicio que yo creo que lo podemos entender como altamente intelectual. Yo no vi una arquitectura simplista, pero también vi una arquitectura muy sensible al sitio. Eso fue lo que nos estuvieron explicando a lo largo de este congreso. Es una arquitectura, en consecuencia, que podemos nosotros entender adecuada a las características de cada uno de estos lugares en donde tuvimos oportunidad de verla. Y déjenme señalar algo más, quizás con eso terminaría yo este análisis de la arquitectura. Es extraordinariamente bella en todos los casos. Y yo creo que nosotros, en México, tenemos que rescatar la belleza. ¿De acuerdo? Fíjense finalmente también, ustedes son muy jóvenes y quizás no vieron la televisión en blanco y negro. A mí sí me tocó. Prendíamos la televisión y pues todo lo veíamos blanco y negro. Ustedes nacieron con la televisión a color. Tienen una extraordinaria imagen que a mí me parece una maravilla, ¿no? Cada vez con más calidad, Creo que hasta se ve mejor la realidad en la televisión que fuera de ella. Lo que vimos con Ernesto Campo, a mí me parece que es el nacimiento de un cambio radical en cómo vamos a manejar la energía en la arquitectura en el futuro. Porque pensar que los edificios pueden a través de sus propios materiales generar esta energía que necesitan para funcionar, para hacer, es un cambio radical. Estamos naciendo a una nueva era en ese sentido, y yo creo que eso también hay que aplaudirlo, porque además es una propuesta en México de los mexicanos y de la UNAM, como lo dijo el propio Ernesto Campo. Yo creo que hay que darle un aplauso a eso. Agradecemos desde luego también a todos los profesores que nos visitaron del extranjero, porque nos permite entender cómo ellos están realizando esta magnífica arquitectura y nos permite también establecer una relación con ellos. Yo creo que nosotros a lo largo del Congreso vimos que estamos al nivel de la mejor arquitectura del mundo. Bueno, con eso yo termino y quisiera cederle el micrófono a Raúl Buitrón para que nos dé también unas palabras.
Muchas gracias. Seré muy breve. Sin duda este es un esfuerzo colectivo. Obviamente no puedo dejar pasar todas las gracias a toda la gente, por supuesto a ustedes, que hayan tenido el entusiasmo, el interés, las ganas de ver lo que presentaron, todo lo que presentaron y lo que presentamos todos los que nos involucramos en este congreso. Por supuesto, muchas gracias a Marcos Massari y a Héctor Ferreiro, que son fundamentales, sin ellos esto no puede funcionar. Los tres realmente conjuntamente somos los hacedores de este plan. Por supuesto, muchas gracias a toda la gente, es muy difícil decir todos los nombres porque se me iría alguno, pero muchas gracias a toda la gente de educación continua, de la propia facultad, pasantes, personas que están haciendo servicio social, que también participaron activamente. Sin ellos esto tampoco funcionaría como debiera funcionar, como hubiera funcionado o como funcionó. Mejor dicho, demostramos una vez más que tenemos mucho interés y estamos ávidos, ustedes, nosotros, de poder compartir conjuntamente lo que tratamos de hacer para mejorar lo que tratamos de aprender todos los días, ¿no? Arquitectura. Y yo solamente terminaría diciendo lo que cantan muchas veces en un edificio característico de CEU que está enfrente de Rectoría UNAM, como no te voy a querer. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, yo los veo a todos como muy satisfechos. Eso me hace a mí estar triste porque desde las 5 de la tarde estoy queriendo venir y creo que llegué hace 5 minutos. Entonces no tuve oportunidad de compartir las experiencias del Congreso. Sin embargo, evidentemente tengo informes y relatorías de lo que ha pasado en el Congreso y yo la única pregunta que les haría es, ¿valió la pena el Congreso? Pues tendría que decirles que este ha sido el Congreso que más audiencia ha tenido y eso es reconfortante para quienes preparan este trabajo, que es un trabajo muy complejo, contactar a todos los ponentes, organizar el Congreso, ver cuál es la estructura, cómo es que se debe manejar. Cada ponente que pasa al frente tiene ya claro qué es lo que estamos persiguiendo, sobre todo en el Congreso. O sea, el Congreso tiene una secuencia, ¿no? Una secuencia que cuando yo empecé dije que no era un juego, el Congreso desde luego no es un juego, es mucho más complejo que un juego, pero creo que la síntesis que acaba de hacer el arquitecto Ferreiro es una síntesis muy clara. Tenemos que tener un objetivo y el objetivo es que en su formación ustedes tienen que tener como estudiantes de la UNAM la posibilidad de conocer las visiones externas, las visiones internas y las visiones propias, porque cada uno de ustedes tiene una visión propia y esa visión se nutre de estas experiencias. Lo que ustedes han aprendido a lo largo de esta semana no se aprende en el aula cotidianamente, la experiencia profesional y los ejemplos que se han venido a presentar hablan de otras experiencias que no son las de sus profesores. Se habló fuera de las áreas, por ejemplo, no se habló del área de tecnología y del área de historia y del área, ¿no? Sino que finalmente hablamos de una arquitectura, un urbanismo, hablamos de un sitio y hablamos de una realidad. Yo espero que el Congreso de verdad haya sido para ustedes una experiencia para que nuestra realidad se nutra de esta oportunidad que nos brindan todos los ponentes que han venido a participar en el Congreso, de compartir con nosotros su experiencia y sobre todo su conocimiento. Gracias a todos. I want to thank you, Ian, Michelle. You are our international, right now, you are our international speakers. I want to thank you very much in name of the university and in particular of Facultad de Arquitectura. It was a great experience for us that you were here, and I think all our students would like to thank each of you what you have taught us and the way you have shared us your experience. Thank you very much. Y muchas gracias a todos.
También muchas gracias, antes de que se nos olvide, muchas gracias a Armando Carranco, muchas gracias a los moderadores. Gracias.
Sí, le vamos a pedir a Midori nada más que entregue los últimos diplomas. Por favor, no se vayan. Nada más vamos a entregar estos últimos reconocimientos porque ya lo decía el arquitecto Massari, es un equipo y este equipo tiene un reconocimiento también y yo le voy a pedir al arquitecto que nos haga el favor, al arquitecto Massari, al arquitecto Raúl Huitrón, si nos hacen el favor de entregar también estos reconocimientos que para nosotros son muy importantes.
A la arquitecta Isaura González Gottdiener. A la arquitecta Adriana Lira Oliver. A la maestra en arquitectura Jimena Torres Rojas. Al maestro en arquitectura Carlos Romo Zamudio. Y desde luego al maestro en arquitectura Raúl Huitrón Riquelme. Gracias por conservar el entusiasmo. Y desde luego los que están aquí abajo, que no hay nadie, pero queremos agradecer a Holcim México. Ah, sí están, y a Chicago Metallic. Sí. Bueno, ahora sí ya todo el mundo puede empezar la desbandada. Muchas gracias.